Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I would like to warmly welcome you to this conference, which closes the 14th World Assembly of Emmaus International. It's wonderful to see you all here.
Interpretación de...
We have interpretation to French and English and Portuguese.
Ay, perdón que les doy la espalda. ¿Sí? Bueno. No, les decíamos que le da...
As I was saying, I'd like to warmly welcome you to this conference, which draws to a close the 14th World Assembly of Emmaus International, and we've been working very hard over this week. We would like to thank the Intendant of Montevideo, the Director of the Social Development Department, the representative of the Ambassador of France, the representative of the Chamber of Senators and the Parliament, the representative of the CNT, the Mayor of and the social movements are with us, and all of the public officials and workers who are welcoming people here today. We'd like to thank all of our friends and everyone involved with Emmaus. We'd like to especially thank those on the panel: José Mujica, former president of Uruguay; Tarcila Rivera Zea, Quechua activist who will be, and Olivier de Schutter, who will be online. We will also be joined by Patrick Atun, president of Emmaus International, Natalia Pérez Manzano, and the general delegate of Emmaus International. So we're going to give the floor to Carolina Cose, who very kindly agreed to welcome you. Unfortunately, she has to leave early, so we'll give the floor to her straight away. There seems to be an issue with the Portuguese interpreting.
Muy brevemente.
I'm going to be very brief. I would like to say that for Uruguay in Montevideo, it is a great honor and it fills us with joy that you decided to carry out your assembly, this yearly meeting here, because you represent the drive for equality, justice, for a better life. There's a tradition in Montevideo, and this has been around for 30 years, struggling and fighting for equality. Equality is perhaps the most important pillar, and it drives democracy. So justice, equality, equal opportunities, and to leave no one behind and to leave nowhere behind. This is a key aspect of our responsibility. On behalf of all the inhabitants of Montevideo, from the bottom of my heart, I want to warmly welcome you today and forever. I don't want to focus on what we do, because there is lots of information on the internet about that. But I would like to take this opportunity here in person. Luckily, we're able to see each other, to welcome each other, and to think together in person. And this is like nothing else. And we have such a distinguished panel. Wonderful figures from my country. And this will be the natural outcome of your work. I want you to continue walking forward, and you will be able to count on us in your struggle against poverty and for equality. Thank you.
Bien, gracias, Carolina.
Thank you, Carolina. We know that you're very busy today, so can we get a warm round of applause I just want to explain why I have to leave, and I'm sure that we're all going to embrace this. In just a few minutes, Montevideo is going to appoint the illustrious citizen Monea Baristri, an adorable mother and grandmother of disappeared children in Uruguay. And for us, it's such an important moment. So before Carolina leaves, I just want to say that we had a meeting with social organizations yesterday in which the mothers and grandmothers of disappeared children participated. So we are committed to this struggle as well. Thank you. So now we're going to give the floor to Patrick to introduce himself and to open the panel. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor for us to be received here at the Montevideo City Hall in Uruguay, in a country which is highly symbolic for the existence of the Emmaus movement. And we would particularly like to thank Carolina Cos, the intendant of Montevideo, for her welcome and her presence by our sides in this beautiful hall. It's also a great moment of pride for our movement, and particularly because almost 400 participants are here from 34 countries, and here we're able to welcome 3 key figures who are committed to combating poverty and working for justice, for the right to each of us for a dignified life. We would like to warmly thank them for having accepted this invitation. On holding our World Assembly, which takes place every 4 years, it's important for our movement to hear from people as inspiring as you are, and to hear their analysis of the situation, but also their thoughts on what we do and what we defend. Today, more than ever, we must defend the idea of a different world, a fairer world, one that's more solidarity-based, that respects the planet, and making sure that this is possible. And it's not easy, given the accumulation of crises, climate change, conflict, and setbacks to our democracies, which are on the rise throughout the world. We must, therefore, unite to speak up on the urgency of bringing about real significant change. This is what we sought to do with the publication of our first Emmaus Global Report on our fight against poverty. This report was not drafted by experts, but it was based on the everyday experiences and work of Emmaus groups around the world, working with the most vulnerable and excluded human beings. It proposes tangible solutions to remain steadfast in our fight against poverty and its causes, and demonstrates that all credible alternatives are existent to the dominant model that enable us to live with dignity altogether. This is one more contribution which reiterates the will of many social movements that strive to act together to tackle social, political, and environmental issues. Only by working together and including alongside political leaders can we reiterate who we are and what voice we want to promote for the world of tomorrow. This is why, within our movement, we have this responsibility to promote the 3 requirements of our global report, involving vulnerable people for them to assume their rightful place in society, placing the public interest at the heart of public policies, and lastly, developing an economy that genuinely works for human beings and their environment. I thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Good evening. First and foremost, I would like to express my special thanks to Emmaus. I'd like to thank them for this invitation. Many of us, if not all of us, from a very young age, are aware that in the world and in Uruguay, that Emmaus is at work. We know what kind of society it is fighting for and will continue to fight for. So in this report, in the summary of the World Report, we see the most important issues of today. These are our issues. Agendas can be perceived or rejected. And this is the agenda for a better world, a different world. A world in which there are personal freedoms combined with social justice, integration into society, and a perspective to respond to all problems that we have. And it would be ridiculous if I spoke more, given the panel we have, because we have representatives from another society, representatives of a new society, we hope, of a society for which we must continue to fight. There is work that will never end. So, from this perspective, and of course being very clear on the three requirements contained in this document and stemming from your reflection, I'm going to moderate this session, and we're going to start with José Pepe Mujica. He doesn't need any introduction, not here or anywhere else. We want to hear what Pepe thinks about these three requirements, these three priorities. What do they mean with regard to your personal experience?
Amigos,
Dear friends, comrades,
me gasté mi juventud
I spent my young years with the utopian ideas of helping to create a better world. And I was probably wrong. I probably made mistakes. Because I'm a human being. But what you highlight with this document, I think, is key. But I would like to delve into these ideas a little bit further. There's a collective issue here, but there's also an individual aspect to this. Why are we here? Does life make sense? A few years ago, I asked a very rich man and a very old man, tell me, when do you stop? And he said to me, he was 80 odds, and he said, I can't stop. I have to keep amassing fortunes. It's a passion as well for them. There are people that just can't stop. They can't stop making money. And thinking about this, I looked inward. I'm old. Human beings, whether they know it or not, need a cause in their life. And if you don't have a cause, don't worry. The market will build one for you, and you'll spend your whole life paying fees, buying things, paying taxes. Social activists who dream of a better world have a cause, whether they're aware of it or not, to justify the miracle of being alive. Because the only difference between us and other animals is that our biology drives us, but we also have intelligence and awareness. There are questions that don't have answers. And this question of what is the meaning of life? Does it have a meaning? And as some people accumulate wealth, because it's also about accumulating power, and they think that they're going to go beyond go beyond death. But we love life and we want something which transcends us. You're social activists. You want a better world. And they say that a better world is possible. And I don't know if it's possible. What I do know is that it is necessary. It is essential. Because we're talking about an environmental holocaust. And we have the 3 requirements in your report. It's such a difficult time for human beings. People are getting tired of making money. They've invented space tourism now. Well, women in Africa continue to walk for kilometers to collect water. And how do we fix that world? That's why I'm grateful for your work and for what you continue to do. And firstly, for being concerned for those who suffer the most. And for creating what you have. They say that you're poor if you don't have a community. And you, through your actions, create community for those who are not protected, those who fall by the wayside. And that's got a value which goes beyond material wealth. Because the world today is characterized by increased solidarity. Poverty is structural, and it's not only an economic issue. We're talking about poverty in all aspects. And that natural thing that biology gave to us, the joy of life and in loving life more than anything else. So I think that this is simple. You have principles of an agenda which goes beyond us. And I want you to spread the word for social movements to take ownership of this. Activists, thankfully, there continue to be people that do this in our world. I know some of the work of your groups, and this has been the case since I was a boy. In Nuevo Paris, in the neighborhoods. And I want to say thank you. And the founder, who had a setback and almost lost his life, here was able to create all of this. And it's not only recognition, but we have to say that this is a beautiful cause for life, and we must reproduce, because there is so much poverty that must be combated. Thank you for existing.
It's difficult to speak after Pepe, but we have to do that because we all have something to contribute. And the text and the introduction, the word from the chair, he talks about Abbé Pierre, who says the voice of those who are voiceless should keep the powerful awake at night. Tarcila will be able to tell us more about this. How can we involve vulnerable people for them to assume their rightful place in society?
Amauta, ukuisun huikumanta, runa simiri mahuarmimkani. Permítame saludar.
Allow me to welcome you, you wise former president, but particularly a wise man. From the bottom of my heart, I'm a Quechuan woman from Peru. And when we talk about giving a voice to those who are voiceless, or giving people the opportunity to express themselves within this diversity that we dream about, where we hope to be able to find the true place that corresponds to us in this world, where diversities and differences mean that we don't leave people behind and we are not divided, but rather that they are the wealth and the dialogue to share knowledge, the types of struggles, but also to seek opportunities so that indigenous peoples, those who pre-existed colonialism, because there is about 480 million of us. And indeed, some of these peoples that pre-existed before colonial times came from many places around the world. We have been speaking out about this specific particularity for the last 50 years. There are 50 million in the Americas. And if we think about the world being 50% women, 50% men, then you can imagine in the Americas when we have 25 million women. When we talk about the voice of those who are most vulnerable, the indigenous populations have worked to define that we are in the situation of vulnerability, that we are experiencing vulnerability. But there are causes that many people don't want to touch, and there are reasons that this is the case, and people don't want to tackle those. Why are we in this situation? Because in the world, who are the ones that are in the most vulnerable positions? They are people who have historically been excluded. Therefore, if we want to develop a better world, because it still is we have a long way to go. However, it's a utopia. Otherwise, we would have given up along the way. But we know that women, we are vulnerable. And then for indigenous women, we make sure that we don't want the state to see us as dependents, but rather citizens that have rights, that have the freedom to shape their own destiny with their own voices and with their free will. They want to do, to act, to be. They want to decide when they want to be mothers, if they want to be mothers. And on this first point, my dear sisters and brothers, I feel it's important to say that indigenous women have identified priorities within these collective rights. And this is the defense of our land and natural resources. Because if we don't have our land, if we don't have access to resources, if we don't have a place to grow, how can we even approach the other aspects? How can we develop an economy by ourselves, using our skills, using our wisdom? Because these are legacies from our ancestors. How can I ask the brothers and sisters, the descendants of these peoples, the Charrúa, who may be here with us today? Because this is where our voices are. As women, we want to address the violence which is at the forefront, the different violence which we experience when we talk about our land, because we're talking about our collective rights. If a company has a right to generate income, and yet it takes us, our fresh water away from us, and it takes our ability to be able to live off nature, the elements, the plants, well, then they are removing our principal ability to be able to be ourselves on a personal level. There is a lot of pain, which also leads us to protest. And naturally, each of us express this according to a strategy which has been developed over time. The girls and boys, minors, some of them younger than 12, 14 years old, girls who see that they're forced to give birth after having suffered violence. How can there be people in power that don't feel that this indigenous girl from a rural area, how can't they see that she has the same right to give birth or not, along with any other child? She has the same rights as other children. So in the world today, my dear brothers and sisters, women and indigenous women are committed to eradicating all types of violence, in both as a collectively and also on an individual level. This also relates closely to what we're talking about, the right to be involved. And this is something that Emmaus defines in slightly differently. But this is the right to speak out, to say what we want and how we want to be involved in the world. When we're talking, for example, today about the world and the awful impact of climate change, we have our food which we are producing. But what's happening here? Well, we can see there's increasing amounts of chemicals. This is harming our life and nature and all forms of animals. So we need to think about this. If we want to change the situation to ensure that there's a fairer world, how should we do this? How can we re-establish balance? And in 92, the indigenous peoples got together from around the world to talk about the discoveries, the evangelical missions, colonialization, and also now the challenges that we face today, because often these don't unite us, but they divide us. So the second point that Emmaus raises when we talk about developing solidarity, I think this is a real challenge. How can we work together to work for a shared and common interest, overcoming the differences that we have? This is a real challenge. We need to go beyond fundamental ideas. We need to look at the shared aspect that we have, which is linked to our humanity. Wouldn't you say? And I'd like to come back to the third point, which is also linked to our sustainable economy. In 92, we called on an elder who was 114 years old, and he was living up in Cusco. And we asked him, because we didn't really understand what gender equality really meant. And since the 80s, we've been speaking out about this to say that we are part of nature, that we are all part of the living beings that surround us. And so we asked this elder what the relationship was like between him and his wife, between him and his children, between him and his pets. And he left us and gave us and shared a clear and wise thought.
Las cosas valen cuando
Things have value when there is a balance. Therefore, we live in an imbalanced world. So how can we contribute to achieving this balance? The respect between different human beings, but also promoting the fact that we're all equal, to try and make sure that we can recover and re-establish the links between the generations. And that's why I'm calling you Emauta, because in the world today, we need examples, we need dignified examples, and not only an example of someone who has the latest car or who has the most modern apartment, because we need to point the finger and identify what the causes are of this imbalance in the world today. So I'd like to thank you, this large Emmaus family, for giving us this opportunity, for giving us this honor to discuss this with our Emauta, who's here with us today.
Toca el turno ahora.
So it's now time for Olivier de Schutter to speak. This will be done remotely. I would like you to focus on the following. And that is something that both Pepe and Tarcila have brushed upon. How to build solidarity from public policy. How can we put at the heart of public policy, public interest. We're listening to you. You have the floor, Olivier.
Bonsoir à tous et toutes.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for welcoming me to Montevideo in this Emmaus International conference. I have great admiration for you, and that has been reinforced after reading the First World Report on fighting poverty and during the day against extreme poverty on the 17th of October. Now, this is very important to reorientate and to drive action against poverty. You have highlighted three issues: the involvement of people in poverty, providing solutions. Secondly, placing the public interest at the heart of public policies. And thirdly, developing an economy that genuinely works for human beings and their environment, and not an economy that focuses on extraction. I think this is a very important group of messages. And I'm going to focus on the second message. This is relating to governments' inability to put public interest at the heart of their policy. Now, this is very topical because throughout the world, we see governments who have become monopolized by a small number of influential economic actors who have managed to appropriate the power of the state so that the state works in their interests. Why growth, economic growth, the growth of transnational companies in economic modernization? These are also political problems, not just economic issues. And why is this the case? Because these actors become as important as governments, and governments are no longer able to stand up to them. They're no longer able to legislate for the public interest. And they fear that if they adopt restrictive legislation protecting biodiversity, supporting the health of people, they fear that these actors might leave the country or leave people unemployed. So these economic actors are competing with the powers of the state. And they benefit from this economic model because for them, for these companies, globalization is the right to make people work for low salaries where trade unions don't have as much power, the right to create factories that pollute in places where legislation does not protect the environment. And it's also the right to pay taxes in tax havens, to pay very low amounts of taxes by declaring their profits elsewhere. For these companies then, economic globalization has become a playground where they're able to pit states against each other, to force them to compete with others, to maximize their profits. And they translate their economic power into political power. That's why a report that was published in 2019, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, talks about the state of profits. Now, these states are states that have been captured by these economic interests, and it forces the state to adopt certain economic policies which are in the interest of these large companies. For example, deregulation, supporting ownership legislation which protects intellectual property. But that means that rural farmers don't have access to seeds, or people are not able to access medication, or policies which benefit the financialization of economy and speculation, from which suffer people. We're seeing this with the price hikes of food. There are shortages. In fact, there are not shortages. It's due to the volatility of markets and of investors who speculate on commodities. To combat this monopolization of state power, we have to place public interest at the heart of public policies. That means better controlling leaders. The issue is not democracy, it's the solution. Many technocrats want us to ignore the people's attempts and to only listen to experts. But I think that people have more to say in public policy. In a more systematic manner, each and every one of us must get more involved in democracy, not just in elections, but throughout democratic life in each country. The objectives of government shouldn't just be growth, financial wealth, the growth of the GDP. It seems that's what most governments focus on, because they think that if we continue to grow GDP, we create jobs, we finance social policies, and we're going to be able to combat poverty. But in reality, this obsession with growth actually destroys jobs as a result of technological development. It also increases inequalities with the excuse of making life easier for companies. It actually increases exclusion, which the social policies are meant to combat. Therefore, we must look to other things, not just growth. We must think about well-being, the buen vivir, as we say in Latin America, good life, reducing poverty and inequality, and indicators of progress must hold governments to account, because they can't just focus on wealth and growth, because people in poverty are not benefited from this in unequal societies, but they must be judged on their performance in social and environmental areas, and they must be judged on social cohesion and protection of people. And I'd like to thank the President, Patrick Catun, and Nathalie Perez-Manon. I'd like to thank them for my invitation to take part. So once again, I would like to thank you.
This first round, where we've heard from our very distinguished panelists, have been based and evolved from very basic, clear points, which are still very relevant. And this is a clear challenge. Pepe talked about the meaning of life as a discussion that we have together, which is not resolved unless it is developed by us. So we need to take into consideration that for equality we need justice, that for that individual equality, regardless of our religious differences, that the fact that we have rich people and poorer people, some with more talent, some with less talents, and this market, which is all about goods and resources. Emmaus is promoting a different vision. And is emphasizing the role of civil society, of how we can develop solidarity actions. So, in order to promote solidarity, we need to understand diversity, and Tarcila made this very clear in her speech because she was talking even in different languages. In Latin America, this was a continent of linguistic diversity. However, year after year in Latin America, we're losing some of the diversity of our languages. And with that, we lose a vision of the world and how we transfer words into concepts. She also mentioned that in none of these contexts in our history has equality been achieved just by men. We require diversity. And this is more important than ever. We need to define, we need to sustain this diversity. And for you, this involves you, not just something that we just put as a cherry on the top of the cake. We really need to go back to the grassroots level. We need to speak out from there. We need to claim our right to Mother Earth. This was also mentioned by Olivier, because he talked to us about how it's important to be vigilant, because when we're talking about intellectual property, when we're talking about the global world, we've seen the patents around the world with the vaccinations that we had, the vaccines, and this is one of the most vulnerable, the most powerful in the world, and we need to be able to defend the rights of the most vulnerable. We need to take on these global struggles to talk about what fair trade really means. What cooperation means. What it really means to have this international agenda. So we've heard that there is this clear competition and this challenge to Emmaus's work. And one thing which is important in Emmaus's work is that we have this not only ideas, but we have practices which are in place. We have people that embody these ideas in the way that they live. Each lives or should live defending and putting in practice these ideas which are so essential. Therefore, for the second round, before we call on the speakers, I would like us all to think about the central role of civil society, of social movements, which are not national, and you can see this is clearly displayed here by Emmaus, that we have real platforms, we have ways of uniting strengths and forces. So what is the national, the international, the global role of civil society in these struggles to develop a better world? So, Pepe, do you have something to say for the second round of our discussions? My dear friends, I think that policy and politics is not in great shape, but yet it's essential. As a concern, it goes beyond the different parties and the definitions, because it's about struggling to redistribute, to fight for those that don't have as much, because humans are gregarious beings, animals. We don't know how to live in isolation like pumas. For thousands of years, humans have lived in groups across the world, to such an extent that in the olden times, going beyond the death penalty, it was really the thing that held us together was this community, because in order to live, we need to live together. We need a family that protects us. And this was how we lived for thousands and thousands of years. We lived, after all, because within these communities and society, we are individuals. However, our nature is very specific. Naturally, individuals clash. There are differences. And the role of politics is to ensure that we have this family which is united, and because without this common framework which holds us together, we become more vulnerable. I have a lot of friends, but if there's something wrong with my heart, I need a cardiologist. And who gives me what I need, because we depend on each other in order to live. And this is true across the world. And there are conflicts. There will always be conflicts. But we need to try and find a way of understanding each other. And that is where politics should enter. It should ensure that we have this gel which then holds us together and protects us. But this is why it's important that how politics is put into place and for what purpose. The modern republics so we have the monarchies, we have the different legal frameworks, because we need to make sure that we are all equal before the law. And we've seen the sacrifices of humanity, but we know clearly that the rules are there. But from a practical perspective, the differences, the wealth, means that those who are very wealthy have a different experience of life. It's important to make sure that we have politics. But political responsibility means that we should not trample on people who aspire, to allow them to live the way they want to live, rather than just those who are in comfortable positions who have gained wealth in society. The way that we think needs to be done from the point of view from the society. It should be politics to look at not just those who are aristocrats or the wealthiest. We need to be and make sure that we are seen to do this. And this is something we need to bear in mind. We need to be present. We need to be there to make sure there's a generation of ideas, but also practices, also commitments. And this can be seen in the deeds that we take, because this is important for democracy. It's been threatened, it's been poisoned. And in Latin America, that we can see that 28% of the population agree with authoritarian governments. And that's why democracy is being jeopardized, because policies are having an impact on the way people live. And this disconnects people. So money is there. Of course, there are people who want to gain wealth and to amass money, but there are those that want to keep doing this. So they can just go off and work with their companies. But I think that what's essential is that across the world, it's important to make sure that those, and particularly the poorest populations, they need to be heard. They need to be taken into account, because often they are feeling offended. And this is very serious. The modern republics and democracies were not created to sustain the nobles like it was in the past, but quite to the contrary. They were born of this utopian idea that we are all equal. It also is the opportunity so that everyone can then express their own positions, their right to live their lives. So this is what equality is all about. And we all know that we're living in a world which is increasingly wealthy. And there are material challenges. We have these scientific advances and progress, but we have poverty, which is also increasing. And if we want to support and defend democracy, we need to be concerned by who we then elect to lead our societies, because we need to define this. It's not about being objective, because it's essential when faced by the anguish and the pain of so many people. And this is the responsibility of politicians.
Bueno, y luego de la Mauta.
Okay, Tarcila, you now have the floor. So, it's late in France now, so I'm thinking that we could perhaps give the floor to Olivier and then over to Tarcila afterwards. Is that okay? Yes, so Olivier will give you the floor as a result of it being so late in Europe. So you have the floor, Olivier. Thank you. It's very generous of you to allow me to speak first. I would like to underscore a point that I was quite struck by from what the speakers said, and also including what the president of Emmaus International said, Patrick. And this is relating to involving people in poverty when it comes to identifying solutions for them. I think that it's extremely important to value more the skills of these people, their talents, but also, and most especially, the experience of poverty that they have, their trials and tribulations. In many policies combating poverty, the solutions don't come from people in poverty, but rather from experts, technical experts who apply solutions based on theoretical models when it comes to fighting poverty. And the people to be supported are seen as objects. We're talking about offering them things that they must respond to. But let's not forget the reasons for these people, their daily realities. They're often treated as passive beneficiaries of the support, or worse, they're simply seen as not relevant. Not relevant when it comes to these policies and the way in which we must draft them. In the report of the UN Special Rapporteur on poverty, we note that it's only by sharing the experiences of these people that we will be able to address the problems that they suffer and to find real solutions. For example, I just drew up a report on the non-resort to law. As for a number of social rights, of unemployment benefits, family benefits, and so on, the people who benefit from these rights don't claim these rights. They don't have the information, they have other priorities, and often they're scared to interact with social services, and they've also suffered discrimination, disregard, violence from institutions, and they fear that there might be consequences to claiming their rights because they have experienced trauma. And we've seen that this has been compounded with the pandemic. They're not able to assert certain benefits because they don't know how to use online forms, etc., and therefore they're not able to claim those rights which belong to them. Only by listening to these people, understanding why they don't claim their family allowances or their unemployment benefits, will we be able to understand what is not working in the way in which we have created this social protection system and the way in which we've organised social services. And in fact, increasingly, these services seem to be focused on preventing people from committing fraud rather than helping people in poverty. This includes social workers. They want to help, and they don't want to be seen as police. This is just one example. There are many. But I think that there's a key importance here when it comes to implementing participation. Very often we try to combat poverty through policies which do not include people in poverty. They have no say in the response. And we have to let these people be players in their own fate. And we can't just be seen to be losing efficiency in our actions, etc., but we have to really value the experiences of these people, and that's where I want to finish, because I think that it is of utmost importance not to see poverty as a technical issue that technocrats have to solve, or simply as a problem that we can just throw money at, even though, of course, we must fund programs. But this is an issue of involvement, inclusion, and respect. I thank you.
Bien, Tarcila.
Thank you, Tarcila. You can address the same issue. The Emauta, the former president, mentioned power and politics. And I would add to that the responsibility that states have when they gain access to power in representing the citizens of the country. Therefore, I wonder, why does power make us lose track of this? It makes us dizzy. Because the perception in democratic states is explicitly this, that there is an improper exercise of power by the leaders. And so what examples are younger generations receiving when we're talking about politics and power? So here I feel there is a huge issue. The other topic which I feel is important relates to education and awareness that all citizens should have of our rights with this diversity. And here I really feel it's important to highlight the role of education. But because there are countries where public education is not up to scratch to educate citizens who have rights. And they don't believe that it's just this God that gives us gifts. I think the content of the education systems in our countries and in our states needs to change so that we can educate our children about new ways to become citizens with rights. Rights to be involved in moving forward to promote the hopes of the people, to participate in politics and policies. So I think that it is important to make sure that we keep in mind that we're not alone. We need to keep an eye both looking behind us and in front of us, because for 50 years we have been reiterating that we need to protect our environment. And in June, we're holding a meeting on this. We held this in Switzerland, 50 years ago. And every time that we talk about climate change, we're impacted by how the states and how we are actually killing us all. So when we look at the commitments of states, because they've committed to the 2030 agenda, to eradicate extreme poverty. Well, the indigenous peoples started to consider this and say, well, why does this actually exist in these countries? And then the programs to alleviate poverty are just all about donations which create dependency. This is the wrong policy, as I see it, and it makes the recipient feel useless. It makes them feel like they're receiving charity, and that needs to be changed. And I think we need to change this through formal and education and training. This is why it's really important to have positive examples, because they can then overshadow the bad examples that we see. And I think the best form of communication, which should be used to try and construct is actually being used to destroy us. So where shall we start from? Our amauter, our wise teacher. Well, we need to start with education. We need to look at social cohesion. So we can obtain power, but then exercise this power in a fair manner, with focused and based on justice, and not as it's currently taking place. The 2030 agenda says that we commit to everything involved in protecting the environment, our natural resources, eradicating extreme poverty, and yet there are economic policies in our countries. It's all about causing harm. And this is an awful aspect in this region, because it's the most unequal, but also the most corrupt people who have been in power and that are incredibly corrupt. So how can we bring about this change? What should we focus on? Who shall we take this journey with? I think that we cannot lose sight of our dreams to have a different world. This is why it's important to make sure that in our societies there are defenders of our collective rights, such as the rights of nature. But often these people then pass away, they're criminalized. So often they're forgotten. And why does this happen? Indigenous peoples ask, why are we poor? Why are we suffering from poverty? Yet my peoples, which is 3,700 meters above sea level, in the mountainous area, is being taken over for gold mines. So where shall we go? There are there's such a diversity of potatoes in Peru, over 4,000 types of potato. But where do we go? We need fresh water. We need to keep promoting this these varieties of potatoes. But if they take away our water in the name of on behalf of economic development, because there's gold, then where should we go? So indigenous people reached the conclusion that if they want our land so much, if they're going to be prepared to evict us from our land, then we're not so poor after all. Yes, we are experiencing poverty due to other causes, which are often external to us as a people. But what does it mean to be a politician? And what does it mean to contribute to exercising power within the framework of a society which seeks balance, so that we don't have to keep talking about inequality and people being left behind and people who are denied even their basic rights? To conclude, I went to the local school and I had 2 years of education, classes in Spanish, and I didn't understand because I didn't speak that language. So I had to leave the community to learn Spanish. And I started school being a Quechuan speaker, being an indigenous child, being different was the worst thing. And we're working to change this so that differences are not something that we're ashamed of, but that we embrace the diversity that we have, the best that we have, that we live in an intercultural world, to make sure we have these equal human relationships, that we have an equal relationship with nature and the exercise of power, and also our involvement in politics. So I'd like to stop here, Amauta. I would also like to hear from you to ask you how we should do this based on politics. How should we change this poor form that we have of exercising power?
Bien, aquí
So this draws the panel to a close. It's been very insightful. And this will continue in the mind of each and every one of you. Here we often say that thanks to God, Uruguay is the most secular country in the world. However, and this is no coincidence, there's a lot of convergence with a movement such as Emmaus, which, while it is secular, it does have its origins. It's got its footprints that do not disappear. And Pepe often likes to recall this. In this country, well, perhaps in this part of the continent, there was an expression which is still true today. Node is more than anybody. In Uruguay today, we must continue to uphold this ideal. But this expression that was so important throughout our history has survived only in our country. These 3 long days of work and debate, we hope that we continue to feel what we always feel in Uruguay with visitors. They need to be a good host, to be kind to you. And I hope, and I'm sure, that Emmaus Uruguay has achieved this. Therefore, I want to express my warm thanks to each and every one of you. And then we've got Patrick and Nathalie, who are going to give us something which, according to Emmaus language, has a beautiful name. And that is the resistances. Therefore, I'm going to give the floor to Patrick.
Thank you very much. It's not an easy task to take the floor after hearing from all of these speakers, but thank you very much for having taken the time to come to have this discussion with us and to have taken the time to look at our work and what we try to do in terms of being the voice for the voiceless, as our founder, Abbé Pierre, said. I would like to thank you because in your remarks, I can see that you have clearly seen our passion to welcome the most excluded, our work with recycling, and to create solidarity, and that we want to ensure that this passion is also included in political decisions. And that's what we were trying to do by drafting this report. We were afraid because we thought people might see that it would be view this as a report written by experts, and that's not at all the case. The important thing is for everyone in this movement and external to the movement is able to take ownership of this report. And sometimes people feel afraid of this. We are afraid of taking action and speaking out because we feel too small to do this. We are intimidated when it comes to lobbying decision makers. But it's impressive to hear the analysis. And of the panelists. So I think that your speeches really give us this impetus to try and move forward with our political action. And I would also like to connect with what Tarcila said when it comes to the challenge of education, which is also one of the key demands in our report. Because indeed, we can't just have this passion this will to want to express ourselves, but we also have to understand the rights. We need to have education so that we can become rights holders. And I think that that is very important. And this is something that you mentioned. And indeed, at our World Assembly, we just voted on a resolution to develop our training processes, because we are very aware of education as a means to raise awareness. So thank you very much for all of your remarks. I think that that will enable us to leave Uruguay with a great deal of motivation. So thank you very much.
Oui, moi je voudrais aussi.
I would also like to thank these great speakers here with us this evening for everything that they told us and their thoughts. Because as the former president said, what is the meaning of our life? And this is something that raises questions when we can see the scale of deregulation when it comes to democracy, ecology, everything which is connected to our resources that we need for a dignified life. And this is something which is fundamental for us, because as we see at Emmaus, and this was repeated over the last 4 days when we worked in Piriapolis, the meaning of our life at Emmaus is to say that we have these rights. And I think that you've said this during your speeches, that we need to take this in hand. And I think that this is something that we must do. This is something that we owe our founder, Abbé Pierre. And for the last 10 years, and since his passing, we've been fighting for this, because if we are not actors of our own development, then it would be difficult to achieve this. And what is fundamental here, because politics, whether it's in Latin America, Africa, or in Europe, these politicians are more or less the same. When it comes to the elections, they say that they're going to do this, that, and the other, but then when they're elected, we wonder whether these are still the same people, whether they're actually listening. Is it the environment that changes them? But at Emmaus, we're saying, no, this is not possible. We must make sure that vulnerable people, those living in difficulty, for them to stand up through their practices, through the alternatives and the solutions that they put forward, so that they can overcome this situation. And this is something which is essential for us. And this is reflected in our global report. And as you've seen in this report, this is all based on our experiences. This is the experience over the last 60, 50 years, because we know that poverty is not inevitable. Poverty is something that we have created. But in Emmaus, we say no. If humans are involved at the heart of policies, if the economy is developed to work for human beings, and we can overcome the situation. So on behalf of Emmaus International, I would like to thank you warmly for this commitment that you've given us and this new lease of life, this energy. And I just also want to say that we have been hosted beautifully, we have worked hard, and we've had a great time here in Uruguay. So the fight continues.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la...
Thank you so much for being here. And before we give you the resistance pins that we have for you, we'd like to hear if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, make some comments. We've got two distinguished figures from the continent today, so we can open a short period of time in which maybe we could have a couple of questions. My name is Marie-Joseph. At the beginning, Mr. Mujica talked about a utopia, a social utopia. But you were successful in your social program, so it's not a utopia. And in fact, our world lives with another utopia in mind, liberalism. And this is the drip-down theory. So the question is then, how can we denounce this utopia, this dribble-down effect? Because that is that wealth will come from the top and dribble down to the poorest. So how do we speak out against this utopia in the same way that we speak up for the social utopia?
Bueno, quisiera que piensen
I would like you to think about a saying that we have here. No sheep was saved by flying. So what this means is that the world that we will have will be the one that we can add to with our struggles. Neoliberalism will not disappear just magically as a result of time or space. This is a construct. This was built by humans. Therefore, it must be human beings who dismantle it. And that's what we're doing. You're not alone. There are many social movements all around the world. It's not all lost, nor have we achieved all that we want to achieve. We can only look forward to continuing our commitment to the struggles. This will depend on our collective efforts, the collective efforts of each individual, each utopia, each commitment, and our real and systematic commitments to action. Life has taught me that human beings are able to dream. And that our dreams are longer than our own lives. Every struggle must create new fighters who continue, because that is what is needed. We're not going to bring an end to injustice through magic, nor is there a promised society just around the corner. There is a beautiful struggle which requires lots of Emmaus and lots of social activists throughout the world. Women committed to change. We must not stay quiet. And sometimes there is a price to pay. But how beautiful is the miracle of life when you spend it working for your dreams and your beliefs. And when you feel old, because you look into the mirror, you shouldn't reproach yourself because you haven't ignored what you believed and have worked so hard for your whole life.
Betrayed. Yeah, sorry, I wrote it too late.
Oh, sorry, I don't know.
No, don't worry.
Hola.
My name is Cecilia. I belong to a vulnerable neighborhood, as they often say. And what I have gathered today in meeting people from Emmaus, this has brought me back to my youth, my childhood. And it was very different to today. And a childhood in which Emmaus had camps. They took care of the vulnerable people in these areas. And I am so happy that Emmaus continues to do this work alongside people, given that it's such a difficult time. We talk about politics, being able to provide support to all of these people who carry out these important tasks. We're talking about peoples and our vulnerable members of society. And I was telling some people from Emmaus, some of the people from Emmaus that work in my neighborhood, that they are emergency housing areas. And for a long time, there was rubbish, trash, but we were able to eradicate that issue and to really educate people when it comes to waste. And I just wanted to mention that because I want Emmaus to continue working with our peoples and over time. Thank you.
I would like to say two things. The first is to echo something that Olivier de Schutter said, which I feel is fundamental, which was summarised by Abbé Pierre in saying that if you want to help people, you have to stop harming people. So I do think it's also important to reiterate the two different levels that Abbé Pierre talked about for changing things. Firstly, through political action, and also the grassroots level. And if I may, Pepe Mujica, I can see that today the politics in Uruguay are very difficult. So perhaps we should try and copy our friends, those who, because it's true that the people in power are just following the same objective, and this is replicated across the world. In society, we have thousands of struggles and militants, but we find it very difficult to speak with one voice. And this is exactly the moment where we need to speak out with one voice so that we can make sure that we have impact. This is something which is being developed more and more with different movements where developing this economy, making sure that people are at the heart of this. And this is something which is in progress. However, I think we need to go further with this economy, because the goal is to make sure that we can replace the current dominant model of the economy, which is trampling on people, so that we can develop our own courses of action, so that there are ways to overcome this and find our own path, developing solutions.
Perdón, pero no tenemos más espacio para preguntas.
I'm sorry, we don't have any more time for questions, and I apologize for my voice. I've been talking a lot during the World Assembly. It was a real pleasure to hear from everyone. It was excellent to have this discussion together, and this is something which will continue over time. I'm very emotional because we've been anticipating this moment for so long. And as Patrick said, we're going to hand out these resistance pins. They're tiny, but we wanted to make sure that we all hold a symbol of this resistance, a resistance which reflects our struggles, and I apologize that they're so tiny.
También tenemos el informe de Emmaus.
We also have the Emmaus Global Report and Abby Pierre's book.
¿Le gustó? Bueno, muchísimas.
Thank you so much for being with us. As you know, we're all going to there's a press conference in the Sala Dorada. So we'd like to give them a round of applause now, because they're going to head to the press conference.
Pues sí. Dorado. Ajá. Bueno, como quieran.
Hola. Hello. We're no longer following the program, but my dear Emauta, that I want to tell you that this was made by hand by the Quechuan women in my region, and it's unisex.
Las mujeres
Women, they wear it to carry our children, but also to carry things. Men, equally, when they are going to carry things. The children who are a bit bigger, they do this. But when they go to work, they also wear it like this. And they carry their lunch in it. So it's not just for women, it's for both men and women. I think that it's a very intelligent garment for those who have to scramble up mountains. It's true because it also is used to protect us from the rain. So if you have the skiklia, the name of this garment, and it's suddenly pouring down with rain, you just have to pop it over and the rain will fall, but you won't get wet. Okay, I'll take that into consideration.
mucha salud,
I wish you great health and energy.
De aquí es más de la oveja.
Sí, sí. Disculpa.
Sí, por favor. Muchísimas
Continúa.
Hola. Por favor, permanezcan en la sala que todavía no hemos terminado.
Okay, so please stay in the room because we haven't quite finished.
Ya lo dijo, ya lo dijo. Hola.
Hola. Bueno, como ya se escucha, ahí está la melaza, una comparsa de la música típica de Uruguay, pero no cualquier comparsa, una comparsa de mujeres.
Okay, so these are women who are dancers, drummers. They wave the feminist flag, and at Emmaus, this is a sign of culture for social transformation, because this is something we've been promoting for years. So that's why we wanted to invite them here today, and we hope that you enjoy it.